be a vlog of me reading The Secret of Chimneys by Agatha Christie. I've finished the book now, but I thought I'd pop in and do a little introduction. Keep the start of this spoiler-free, but once we get into the actual vlog, I will be spoiling things as I read about them. Secret of Chimneys is one of Agatha Christie's earlier books, so it is in the public domain if you want to download it from, for example, Project Gutenberg. It is a mystery, but there's also thriller elements, there's politics, and some danger to the characters involved. I would give this book about 3 stars. It is like a fun, suspenseful read, but I was a bit disappointed by the solution to the mystery, and I felt like there was a lack of meaningful clues that pointed to that solution. Another thing that hampered my enjoyment was the racism expressed by the characters. They have a lot of negative stereotypes about people from other nationalities, and they throw in some sexism as well. Yeah, overall, the book's not really deep, but it is a pretty fun adventure. I wouldn't say it's one of the better Agatha Christie books. Let's start the vlog. Okay, so now I read the first 4 chapters of The Secret of Chimneys, and I've already learned a secret about the chimneys. Let's start from the beginning. First of all, there's a lot of racism and sexism in these first chapters, and it's, just really gross. The first character we're introduced to is Anthony Cade. I think he's an Englishman. He's working as a tour guide in Africa when he stumbles upon an old friend, Jimmy McGrath. They start catching up, and McGrath tells him about how he's actually met Count Stilptich, this important politician in Czechoslovakia. Stilptich has recently died. And Jimmy's found out that Stilptich has sent him his memoirs with the instructions to get them published in London, and if he does so, he's going to receive a £1,000 reward. But this task has a deadline, and McGrath would rather go hunting for gold in Africa, so he gives the job over to Cade instead. We also learned some other things about McGrath's encounter with Stilptich. Stilptich was saved by McGrath from a mugging when he was drunk in Paris. He mentions Kohinoor, which is a big diamond, and King Victor, who's a jewelry thief. So there seems to be something going on there. Supposedly, King Victor was in jail, but he might have recently been released. Stilptich was afraid of him and his gang, so there is already some suspicions of foul play surrounding his death. And we also learn about another man that McGrath was saved. He's not that important, he dies like shortly after he's been saved, but he turns out to have some blackmail papers from this woman called Virginia Revel, and McGrath would like those papers and letters returned to her so that she knows that she's safe and no longer needs to fear being blackmailed. Then we change perspective and we meet some British politicians. We got Lord Caterham, who actually owns the Chimneys, which is an estate apparently. And he's been being persuaded by George Lomax to hold a party there at the Chimneys, even though he's a bit reluctant. Lomax wants Lord Caterham to invite Prince Michael Obolovich, who is a prince in Czechoslovakia, but Czechoslovakia's established a republic, gotten rid of their monarchy. But there's all this talk that maybe they're going to re-establish their monarchy, so they want to secure British interests in Czechoslovakia and possibly the Czechoslovakian oil by pandering to the prince. Some other people they're going to invite to the party is Hermit Isaacson, who is a representative of the All-British Syndicate, which is a bit of a weird name for an organization, because this is not supposed to be an official party. They're gonna invite Lady Eileen, who's Caterham's daughter. They also bring up Jimmy McGrath. They apparently know that he has these papers from Count Stilptich. And they're gonna invite him because they want to persuade him not to publish these papers because they think that it's gonna be bad for British interests and maybe for the Czechoslovakian monarchy as well. They don't know what's in there. And they also bring up an incident that happened at Chimneys where Stiltish was present. Almost ruined the career of the previous Lord Caterham, who was the current one's brother. So I'm thinking that this incident is that the Koh-i-Noor diamond was for some reason at Chimneys and was stolen, possibly by this King Victor. But we'll find out. Also invited to the party is Virginia Revel, who turns out to be a widow whose husband worked at the Czechoslovakian embassy. And they're gonna use her to flirt with Jimmy McGrath and convince him to turn over the memoirs. We also learn about Bill Eversley, another person who's gonna be invited to the party. He's Lomax's secretary or something, and he also has this very flirty relationship with Virginia. So that's it. Now I'm gonna get back to reading and we'll see what we find out. Hello. Now I've finished the 7th chapter and I still haven't really figured out where this is going, but we've got some more information and some more things that have happened. Anthony, he arrives in London, no problems there. He checks into a hotel and his first night he has quite a few things happen. He's approached by Baron Lolopretsiu, no idea about the pronunciation. He's apparently from the Loyalist Party of Czechoslovakia. He's dead set against these memoirs being published, and he tries to buy Anthony off, but Anthony just decides not to, just on the principle that the next person Anthony encounters is a comrade of the Red Hand who threatens to shoot him to get access to the memoirs, but Anthony's just super good at fighting and just fights him off. Also, his waiter spots some of these papers, and he actually breaks into Anthony's room in the middle of the night, but it turns out that the thing he's after is not actually the memoirs, but the blackmail letters. So he approaches Virginia with the letters to blackmail her, and as she reads them, she realizes that these are not actually written by her, but somehow they've been signed with her first and last name. So she supposes that there's someone with her name out there, just that he's found the wrong Virginia Revel. There's something fishy about this, and she decides to pay him off and make it seem like she's actually intimidated in order to find out more. One other thing that we learn is that Virginia recently lost a diamond brooch. I don't know if this is going to be relevant at all, but a lot of these small details do become pertinent later, so just thought I'd know that. Anthony starts investigating this Giuseppe, and he learns that he came to England a couple years ago, and he's only worked at the hotel for a few months. And also that at some of his previous places of work, there's been robberies around the same time that he's worked there. So he seems pretty sketchy. Anthony is also contacted by Balderson and Hodgkins, who are supposed to publish the memoirs, and they send Mr. Holmes to pick up the manuscript and also to pay Anthony. So he does that, and then he receives this invitation to the Chimneys because Bill Eversley, who was in charge of ensuring that he received the invitation at the correct time, got the wrong boat, so he thought that Anthony arrived 2 days later than he actually did, and now it's too late, the memoir is already gone, so Anthony declines the invitation. And one thing that I think is like especially fishy is that Anthony was essentially accosted 3 different times on his first night at the hotel, but the second night was perfectly calm. When he talked to the publishers on the telephone, they told him to have a dummy manuscript placed in a safe to draw attention away from the actual copy of the manuscript, and I think Anthony does that, but it's like completely unnecessary. It's just not gonna be as simple as it seems right now. I am very doubtful that the manuscript will actually be published in like a timely manner. And it also seems a bit strange that Anthony wouldn't go to the Chimneys, and also the fact that he would actually get to meet Virginia Revel if he accepted the invitation is a bit ironic. Anyways, I'll get back to reading, and I'll update you again a bit later when I know more. Hello. It's the next day. I'm procrastinating going to the library because it's minus 14 degrees Celsius outside. Anyways, I finished chapter 11. So what happened in this part is that someone claimed to be Virginia has telegraphed her house, sending away all her servants, and then Giuseppe's been shot in her house, and he's now dead. Anthony happens to be loitering around Virginia's house, so she invites him in and recruits him to get rid of the body. They find a gun with Virginia's name on it, and a note that says, Chimneys, 11:45 Thursday. So these things seem to have been planted there to blackmail Virginia, so they can't go to the police. So Anthony dumps the body, and he arrives at Chimneys at 11:45, right in time to hear a gunshot. He tries to enter the house, but the windows seem to be locked or something. And we switch to the view of the people in the house. It turns out that it's the Czechoslovakian prince that's been murdered. He's been shot with a revolver. His watch was smashed at 11:45. So it does point to the time of the murder being when Anthony heard that shot, but these things can be faked. I've learned this in a previous book. And it turns out that the windows did not in fact seem to be locked, which is very strange. Another thing that could be important is that Lombaxi telegraphs Baron Volopretsville with the news of this murder. The people in the house are the people that I previously mentioned being at the party, as well as an American named Hiram Fish, who was invited to look at Anthony's book collection, I guess. So yeah, right now it seems that Anthony's been framed. He's been led by this note to show up at the exact time of the murder. He's left his footprints right outside the window. Since it seems that the window was not in fact locked, it seems highly likely that the murderer came in through the window and shot someone and left that way. And another thing that was strange is that no one inside heard the shot. I guess I'm going to be heading out to the library. I'm picking up my Hold on Necessity, and I'll read some more of this book and update you again later. Alright, I'm back now. I got Necessity from the library, so I'm gonna be reading this later in the month. It wasn't actually that cold outside. There was no wind. Stopped by the grocery store on the way back, and I'm always really optimistic about how much I can carry, so I got a nice workout, and now I'm pretty warm. Back to The Secret of Chimneys. I've finished chapter 15. About halfway through now. Yes, we've learned some things. Things have developed. So the signature of the Comrade of the Red Hand is found under the body. This seems to be a bit of a red herring though. It also turns out that the Mr. Holmes that came to Anthony to pick up the manuscript was not actually from the publishers, but was in fact this Czechoslovakian prince. So I guess he bought the manuscript in order to prevent it being published, in order to secure his position on the throne. Unfortunately, he appears to be dead now, and the next in line is Prince Nicholas, who has somewhat the opposite views of the murdered prince, and he seems more likely to sell the oil to American interests instead. We also learned that King Victor is back in England, and that it was in fact the Koh-i-Noor diamond that was lost at Chimneys. So it seems quite likely that the prince was murdered by someone who was staying at the house, since the only footprints outside were Anthony's. So our possible suspects are Lord Caterham, the owner of the estate. I don't think it's him, but you never know when there's someone who's just outwardly incompetent but secretly a mastermind. There's his daughter Eileen. I don't know, no reason to suspect her. I'm not sure what motive she could have. We got Isaacston, who was represented from the All-British Syndicate. He was meeting with the prince to negotiate an oil deal, essentially, in return for helping the prince get his throne back. So he doesn't really seem to have any motive to kill him. Then there is Boris Anchukov, who was the prince's valet. He delivers a really passionate speech about how he's gonna exact vengeance upon the prince's murderer. So either he's a really good actor or he's definitely not the murderer. And then we've got Mr. Fish, who is an American, very highly suspicious, but I suspect that It's a red herring. It's too obvious of a motive to want to kill him for American profits. And then last of all, someone who's getting more suspicious is Virginia, our blackmailed lady. She just seems too clever, too cunning. There's something that she's hiding. And the blackmail story, there has to be a reason for it. I think might be because she is not so innocent as she seems. And she also has past connections to Czechoslovakia. She could definitely have been present at the previous incident with the diamond. And at the end we also learned that Virginia is the only person who knew the prince before the party, who was at the party. And also the prince did not meet Virginia when she arrived. He'd already retired for the night by then, so she didn't actually meet him before he was murdered. First of all, we don't even know that this guy was murdered as the Prince of Czechoslovakia. We'll find that out in probably the next chapter. If he's not the prince, we're gonna have to redo all my theories. We've also found out that King Victor is in England, so I think he's gonna be quite important. Not sure if any of the party goers could be him. King Victor is supposed to be French, I think. People could just be putting on accents. I don't know. I mean, if Virginia's the murderer, I suspect that she is quite possibly working with King Victor, but not actually him. It would seem that the police would recognize King Victor if they saw him, since he was in prison, so they should know what he looks like. And then two other suspicious things was that there was a light turned on in the room right after the murder, and this was the room of a French governess who was recently hired, and the French connection is supposed to point us at King Victor again. And then also Anthony meets a French man snooping around the estate. Hella suspicious. I'm not sure what he was looking for, but Anthony finds him right after he walks past with Virginia. Maybe he was communicating with her? Maybe this is all based on speculation and she's completely innocent, but things are really, really heating up, so I gotta get back to it and read some more chapters. Alright, so I finished chapter 18 now. We've had some new developments, of course. So Virginia's checked the body and it's definitely Prince Michael, according to her. And this strange French man lurking around the property, he seems to have met with either the investigator, who's called Battle, or with the American fish. Also, the valet to the prince, Boris, he swears himself into Anthony's service. I don't know why he feels like he needs to find another master and why he's chosen Anthony, but that happens, so... Anyways, Anthony is very suspicious of the French governess, so he gets permission to go meet her previous employer. And while he's gone, there is a break-in into the house. Virginia is the one who discovers this, and she wakes up Bill. I don't know if I forgot to mention before, but Bill should definitely be on the list of suspects. He's another person who's there at the house for the party. Anyways, Bill and Virginia make their way to the place where the break-in is at, and they try to stop the burglar from getting away. It seems to be just one burglar, but there might have been another one. So the burglar, he escapes through the window. I don't know why they don't lock this window. What is going on? And Virginia tries to chase after him, but she runs into fish instead, and the burglar gets away. He was either like trying to do something with these suits of armor in the room, or he was trying to find something behind the paneling in the walls. He was in the same room as where the murder occurred, also very suspicious. I think he might have been looking for the diamond. One strange thing is that Fish was fully dressed when Virginia ran into him in the middle of the night. Like, it seems possible that he could have been woken up by all the loud noise of them fighting the burglar, but how did he have time, or why did he take the time to get dressed before he came out there? Suspicious. And also, another thing that's suspicious is that Mr. Eisenstein doesn't wake up at all. One thing that makes one of my earlier comments a bit invalid is that King Victor is known to be an expert in disguise, so he could be literally anyone. Also, Anthony has a bit of realization that the room that he might have seen the light right after the murder might not have been the French governess's room. It might have been Mr. Fish's room. He's gone to France and discovered that the governess's previous employment was perfectly normal, perfectly valid. There's nothing strange about her. Also, Isaac Stein is able to be suspiciously quiet. So the burglar breaks in a second time and turns out to be a French detective. I don't know who to trust. This is the point of the book where just everyone seems suspicious, everyone seems to be lying, nobody seems to be trustworthy. Is this guy really a French detective? Is Virginia lying about everything? All the suspicious stuff about Fish and Isaacson relating to the burglary seems irrelevant now. So I guess I go back to my previous suspicions of it being Virginia. The most important thing, I think, in the Agatha Christie books is the motive. But there's also the part about people having secret identities, which can make the motive quite hard to discern. I mean, the clear motives here are finding the diamond, possibly stopping the publishing of the memoirs, reading the memoirs to try to maybe get information about where the diamond is. Nobody has actually read the memoirs, I think. Anthony has read like a little bit of the beginning, but it was rather dense and hard to read, so he didn't get very far before he turned them over to what turned out to be the prince. The prince might have read some of the memoirs, but it seems unlikely that he's read all of it, because he didn't have that long to read them before he was murdered. It's also possible that the memoirs could have been burned by the prince, because that was his plan after he finished reading them, but it just does seem a bit unlikely that that would have already happened. And yeah, everything's a mess. I'm hoping to get a few more clues before I make my final guesses, so let's see what happens next. Hi, it's been a couple of days since I read these chapters and I last updated you, so let's see if I've gotten some good perspective or if I've just forgotten all the important details. Anyways, I've read chapter 22 now. We find out that Virginia's blackmail letters were actually written by the Queen of Czechoslovakia and sent to King Victor, who was going under the name Captain O'Neill. The Queen of Czechoslovakia, she was a former actress and thief, and it's believed that she took the Kohinoor diamond and that her letters held the information about the location where she hid the diamond. We also find out that the bodies of the King and Queen of Czechoslovakia, when they were killed, their bodies were heavily mutilated, so with this detail I have some suspicions that the Queen is not actually dead. So King Victor has also assumed the identity of Prince Nicholas, the heir to the throne in Czechoslovakia, and the real Prince Nicholas actually died some years ago. We find out that, of course, the second burglary was done by the French detective, but the first burglary was actually real. Although the French detective was present there as well, there was a second man who was most likely King Victor. It seems like one important question is, why is Virginia framed for Giuseppe's murder? It seems odd that a revolver with her name was found there. Like, they had to go to so much trouble to engrave that revolver. Why would they do that? The blackmail letters are returned to Anthony. It seems that King Victor has gotten all that he can from them, and now he's going to use Anthony to find out whatever else he needs from them. I said previously that Isaacson was like a very quiet person sneaking up on everyone. In this section, Mr. Fish is also a very quiet person and sneaks up on everyone, so great. I also noticed that Virginia is afraid of battle. Maybe I'm just picking up on all the clues against Virginia, but she seems very suspicious. The French detective goes through Isaacson's suitcase and finds the murdered weapon used in the murder of the Czechoslovakian prince. Now, of course, we always have to ask ourselves, was this planted there or not? Isaacson also leaves the estate Not sure if he's just, busy or if he's trying to get away from the scene of the crime. They do decode the blackmail letters once Anthony's gotten them back, and they find out that after the Queen had stolen the diamond, Count Stiltich found out about this and moved the diamond, and now there is this clue left to where the diamond's been hidden, and it's Richmond 7 straight, 8 left, 3 right. No idea what that means, but there is a hidden passage in the room where the diamond is most likely hidden, so they're gonna explore that, and it's probably gonna be something with that there. Anthony also receives a random note that someone's dropped and that Boris has found, but we don't get to find out what's on the note, so I don't know. This this clue seems pretty pointless. For now, at least. I'm not sure if I'm ready to make my final guess, but we're approaching the end of the book, so I suppose I should make some sort of theory. And to be honest, I still think Virginia is the one who's written these letters. I think that she is actually the Czechoslovakian queen who faked her own death, and then I guess maybe she killed Virginia and assumed her identity, because Virginia did actually exist as a person distinct from the queen before. I mean, she was married to this Czechoslovakian diplomat. Of course, her husband died, so the only people who knew her in England seemed to be Lomax, who is her cousin. So I guess this leads me to to conclude that he must also be in on this, since he would know that this Virginia is not the same Virginia that he's always known. Or maybe he's not even Virginia's cousin. I mean, you could just make that up. I guess you also have to assume then that Isaacson is in on it, and he actually did have the revolver put in his suitcase and everything. King Victor would be either Isaacson or Lomax. I guess, yeah, you'd probably say that Isaacson is King Victor, because Lomax is kind of been recently in jail because he's a British politician. That would have been very odd. So yeah, that's what I think now. I think the stuff with Mr. Fish being American and everything, being tied to Americans trying to get the oil is just a red herring. But of course that would also be an obvious suspect. Yeah, I guess I'll read some more. Maybe I'm gonna do one more update before I find out what's actually going on. We'll see if there's a good stopping point or not. But yeah, see you soon. Okay, finished chapter 25, and I thought I'd do one more update. I think we've had the murderer and King Victor revealed, but you can never be certain until it's over that the detective's not lying to try to lure out someone else or just flat out wrong. But let's start from the beginning. So the gang goes into the hidden passage. They follow the instructions on the note, and they find a hidden cache, but no diamond there, of course. Instead, they find some pearl buttons, a square of course knitting, and a note that just says E. No idea what this means, so that's a bit frustrating. Also, they find out that Fish has been there first, and based on a match that he's dropped. We also find out what the note that Boris found says. It says Hurstmere, Langley Road, Dover, so it's some address, a location. And Battle receives a note. It says, look out for Mr. Cade, he isn't what he seems. Anyways, Anthony goes to this house in Dover, and he finds the comrades of the Red Hand and King Victor's men assembled there. He also gets surprised by Mr. Fish with a gun, so at this part I was questioning if it was actually the obvious Mr. Fish who was King Victor. But then we switch back to Virginia and the others still at the house, and we find out that Fish is actually an American detective. That according to the French detective, it's Anthony who's King Victor. And I didn't really want to believe this at first. First, he says that he comes from his master to pick up Virginia. Virginia sneaks out and goes with him. And that's the end of chapter 25. And at this point, I think I am coming around to the fact that Anthony is King Victor. I really didn't think about him at all when I was thinking about suspects because he was the main narrator, and for some reason I just automatically assumed that that meant that he wasn't the criminal, but I should know better by now. Especially with Agatha Christie. Also, I mean, one thing that makes it hard to believe that he's the murderer is that we hear from his perspective how he hears the gunshot that killed the prince, but he obviously didn't commit that murder, but it is quite possible that Boris did it for him. Although that leaves some other questions of like how, because according to French detective, Boris is working for the Comrade of the Red Hand, and the Red Hand is supposed to be working with King Victor, but Anthony was like threatened by one of these comrades, so at what point did they go from fighting each other to working together? That part's a bit unclear. Anthony being King Victor does explain why Virginia was framed for the murder of Giuseppe, because if he placed this gun that implicates her on the body, then Virginia is forced to seek help to try to dispose of it, and she can't call the police. And who happens to be outside just loitering around, being, you know, available? Oh, it's Anthony. He'll take care of that for her, and then he establishes this relationship with her where she wants to be friendly with him, and she gets him in at the at Chimneys. So I mean, that does seem pretty smart. One thing about like the narrator being the murderer is that there is a lot of weird things, like you think you see inside his head, but clearly we didn't. Where did the letters come from? Who actually killed Giuseppe? Because presumably it wasn't Anthony, since he didn't have the letters for a while. So was it the comrades who killed him, and then they gave him the letters when they couldn't interpret them? That could be true. But then how did they get the idea for the gun? Or like, did he give the comrades the gun so that they could go kill Giuseppe with it? Maybe. I went back to the start of the book, and one thing that stuck out from the beginning is that Anthony says that he hasn't seen his friend Jimmy for 7 years. Then they also say that King Victor has been in prison for 7 years. Which is one of those coincidences that, you know, in hindsight point to something. Virginia receives a note from Anthony, given to her by Boris right before she sneaks out. I don't know, these notes always make me suspicious, like are they actually written by the person that they say they are? But in this case, I don't know, I don't have any specific reason to believe that it wasn't written by Anthony, but I don't remember if we've seen any other notes written by Anthony to like compare them to. I'd like to go through the text again with a fine-tooth comb for that, but I just don't think I'm going to. Yeah, Anthony being King Victor does make the Giuseppe murder like a bit more understandable. It also explains why the letters were finally turned into the police for interpreting, because I feel like if Lomax was working, or was King Victor, then he'd be able to get like a translator without like telling Battle about it. He'd have those connections, whereas Anthony, I guess, doesn't, because he hasn't been in London for 14 years. I think I abandoned my theory about Virginia being the dead queen from Czechoslovakia. That one didn't really seem to pan out, especially since Lady Eileen knew her when she was the diplomat's wife. Yeah, all the suspicious stuff about Fish can be explained by him being also a detective working undercover. Like him appearing outside dressed when there was a burglary, and him getting that secret passageway tour from Lord Caterham. Now that I think about it, Anthony does sort of have that right attitude for the Christie villains. He is so like self-assured, and although he does remind me of another bad boy that did not turn out to be guilty in another Christie book, so I mean that's not quite proof of anything. Yeah, it just appears that once more I've been blindsided by Christie, but I'm gonna read the last part of the book and find out if I have been double duped. Okay. I thought of one more thing. What happened to the memoirs? And I mean, if Boris was the murderer, he would have taken them immediately, I think. But then they would have been in Anthony's possession for a pretty long time, at least since Boris came and swore his allegiance. So it is a bit odd that Anthony didn't just find the diamond pretty immediately. Because presumably the memoirs would hold the key, but maybe they don't. Maybe Count Stilltitch didn't write down where he hid the diamond. I'm still really bothered by these pearl buttons, knitting, and E. What do they point to? Now I'm actually gonna read the rest. Okay, so I finished the book now, and I was wrong about almost everything. I did notice some of the things that turned out to be relevant, but yeah, most things just wished. So it turns out that the person who killed Prince Michael was the French governess, and she was the former Czechoslovakian queen. She did in fact fake her death, and then she went undercover, and slightly before the start of the book, she kidnapped the actual French governess who was supposed to arrive here at Chimneys and assumed her identity. She was looking for the diamond when Prince Michael found her, and then that's why she shot him. One thing I find odd is that she was recognized by Prince Michael, and she had to hide from the Czechoslovakian Baron so that he wouldn't recognize her, but Anthony does not recognize her, and that will be important once I explain some more about Anthony. First, I'm gonna talk about King Victor. King Victor was the French detective. He also kidnapped the actual French detective and stole his credentials, so he had all the correct paperwork and everything. He just wasn't that French detective. Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of clues that, point to this, but the French detective did know a lot about these blackmail letters that were supposedly written by Virginia. He did a whole explanation about them, which I'm not sure if the French police force would have known that much about them. But he was also the one who started talking about King Victor being in America and having all these American ties. That was just a convenient line. And I think the main thing that should have alerted us to French detective being suspicious, and I did think this when the French detective was introduced. I was like, oh yeah, easy to say that you're the detective that just conveniently is just arrived, but then I let it go immediately, so I mean, I'm not gonna give myself too much credit for that. But if the French detective was there only to search for King Victor, why did they discover him going through the living room trying to find this diamond? Why does he care about that? He shouldn't care about that. So that should have been suspicious that he was there searching for the diamond when the King Victor wasn't even present at the second burglary. He also planted the gun in Isaacson's luggage. Anthony, he wasn't King Victor, I'm glad about that, but he was in fact Prince Nicholas, the next heir to the throne after Prince Michael was killed. And I am a lot happier about this because there's less things that the narrator has to hide from us for this to be true. There's not a lot about Anthony that's clues us into this. The only person who recognizes him is Boris. The Baron doesn't recognize him. He doesn't recognize the French governess, despite her being the former queen. It also makes sense, I guess, why he wouldn't want to go to Chimneys immediately, and presumably Prince Michael would have recognized him, so that checks out. But overall, I'd say there's not a ton of clues to this being the case either. But it does explain why he's been out of society for so long and hasn't seen his friend, hasn't been in London. Also, Anthony had the memoirs all along. He in fact did not give them over to the random guy from the publishers who just turns up to collect them. So that makes sense. I mean, I did note that it was strange, some of those details. Anthony's read Count Stilltitch's memoirs, and they didn't actually contain any juicy information, so they were pretty pointless. Now, to the diamond. The diamond was actually located in the Rose Garden. Richmond, in the note that they found, was actually a type of rose that you were supposed to start from and then do the straight left and right thing. The random things they found in the cache, I don't know why. The cache in the secret passageway was... I don't know if it was actually relevant because you weren't supposed to use the instructions in the secret passageway at all, but at some point Anthony says I think it's Anthony. Someone says that these three things, the buttons, the knitting, and the ease, are just all rows of things. So they're supposed to, well, first he says that they're rows of books, but then I guess you're supposed to assume that they're rows of bushes, or maybe it's just not relevant at all because you're supposed to go to the rose garden. But I don't know anything about roses, so I didn't know that Richmond was a rose. There was also a painting that had a Richmond, and then there was a book about Richmond. So I don't think that clue could be like meaningfully interpreted. Although when Anthony and Fish were hanging out in the rose garden, having like, oh, this is something very important, but we just refuse to outright say what it is because we're trying to figure out if the other person knows that it's important too. I mean, obviously then it's clear that there's something going on, but can't be expected to know all the different types of roses. Yeah, so I guess most things make sense with this explanation, but it's not very satisfying because we barely see this French governess. Like, she has one scene where she meets Anthony, and they just don't say anything meaningful. It's mostly about Anthony just hanging out with the kids. And Anthony goes to check out her credentials with her former boss, which does check out because that was that was the actual French governess who worked there. That was a different person whose identity she assumed. It's unsatisfying that the murderer was someone who didn't really get any significant page time. I think the King Victor thing is a little bit more okay because the French detective did have a lot of page time once he turned up, and he did turn up in very suspicious circumstances, but aside from that, there weren't like a ton of clues pointing it to him, although the gun thing, the planted gun, was also suspicious. I'm not sure why they needed to blackmail Virginia. Like, they didn't want her to go there because she would have recognized the governess. She doesn't recognize the governess. Nobody does. So I'm not sure why they were so insistent on that. Yeah, overall, I'm not really satisfied with this conclusion, but it was still fun to read. And yeah, so yeah, I hope that sort of makes sense. Although, to be honest, it doesn't completely make sense to me either. Let me know what you guys thought about this mystery, and I hope you guys have a good day. Bye!